UFOs, flying saucers, daylight discs, and nocturnal lights. Since the beginning of recorded history, the people of planet Earth have witnessed strange events in our skies. Ever since the first unidentified flying object was seen thousands of years ago, we've searched for an explanation, more often than not making something up to calm ourselves down. In this attempted identification, UFOs have been called messengers of God and chariots of fire. Still others insist that UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft from faraway planets and galaxies. With over 600,000 planets in our own Milky Way galaxy capable of sustaining life, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the most commonly accepted theory. Admittedly, the subject of UFOs has drawn mostly scorn and ridicule from the American press, not so much a disbelief in the UFOs themselves as it is a frustration with the lunatic fringe generally associated with the UFO field, those who insist they know what UFOs are, where they come from, and what their agenda is. Whatever UFOs are, there still is no more of a case for one explanation over another until our government comes forward with the information many believe they have been sitting on since the 1930s. Whatever UFOs are, they keep appearing in our skies year after year, witnessed by thousands of average Americans, people who never gave UFOs a second thought until they saw something strange in the sky that they couldn't explain. In 1990 and 1991, reports of UFOs came from thousands of witnesses in the Soviet Union, Africa, Europe, Canada, Central and South America, and the United States. In the Soviet Union, most reports came from Tbilisi in the province of Soviet Georgia. In Europe, thousands watched a triangular-shaped UFO and white round objects fly over Belgium. A display so big and so spectacular that it was witnessed simultaneously in neighboring countries. This time, the Belgian government and Air Force admitted that the UFOs showed up on their radar screens during the multiple sightings. In the United States, thousands watched the same UFOs seen in Europe as they floated over northern Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. In the next 90 minutes, travel with us across the United States as we meet former Air Force officers in Roswell, New Mexico and Tucson, Arizona. We'll meet other UFO witnesses, scientific researchers, newspaper editors, broadcast journalists, and law enforcement officers who have first-hand experiences with UFO sightings and close encounters of all kinds. We won't try to tell you what UFOs are because we still don't know. Rather than speculate on what UFOs could be, we'll explore how Americans react to them in our program, UFOs, A Need to Know. This is the town of Fife in northern Alabama, the heart of what is commonly known as the Bible Belt. The people of Fife still live the same kind of lifestyles their ancestors lived here at the turn of the century. You could say that Fife, Alabama is the most normal place you've ever seen. But what happens here after the sun goes down isn't always normal. On the evening of February 10th, 1989, residents from all over the county deluged the switchboards of local law enforcement agencies. Some callers reported seeing a beautiful flying saucer rimmed by bright multicolored lights, hovering silently and flying off into the distance at a snail's pace. Others watched a large triangular object with 3 large white lights underneath. One local resident phoned the Fife Police Department after watching a crescent and triangular-shaped object pass over the treetops. As the woman reported the object, she asked for a patrolman to come out and look. Fife Police Chief Charles Jr. Garmany and Assistant Chief Fred Works half-heartedly got into their patrol car and headed out to the community of Grove Oak, west of Fife. Before they could reach their destination, they heard officers from neighboring police departments on their radio, all reporting strange objects in the sky, objects that made no sound, objects they couldn't begin to recognize. In less than a minute, Chief Garmany and Assistant Chief Fred Works spotted one of the objects.
A lady had called an object in the sky in, and the chief and myself went out to check it out, and we saw a bright white light in the sky before we ever got to her location. And we stopped and watched it. It was like maybe 2 fingers over the horizon, over the treetop horizon, and appeared to be moving at a very slow pace. And would get brighter and then dimmer, almost like a light turning towards you and then away from you. So we stopped the vehicle and observed it for a few minutes, just, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, and decided we would try to drive toward it. We radioed a town down south of us, and I believe their chief was on duty at that time, and he confirmed that he saw the object, and it appeared to have some blinking lights on it, like maybe a red and green colored lights. A police officer from Crossville radioed and said that he told us his location and said that a large object had flown over him at a fast pace, flying in a west and south direction. Well, evidently we were in the path of that object. We stopped and got out and looked back toward the east, and I saw this object coming over the treetops, and it appeared to have kind of a, I don't know, like a white lights on it. They weren't actually shining where they were real bright. You could just tell they were on it, and there was kind of a glow of the lights around it. And I told Junior, I said, there's the object he's talking about. And I said, it appears to be an airplane. And I said, well, I said, it don't look exactly like an airplane. And it kept flying toward us, and it flew right straight over our heads, and it was hard to tell what distance, what height it was. Maybe we estimated maybe 1,500 to 2,000 feet, and possibly as big as a football field. And it had three huge, like spotlights, kind of triangle shape, with the one being more toward the front. But they weren't shining at the ground. They were like shining back up on the craft itself. So I asked the chief, I said, cut the car engine off. And like I said, there was no other background noises. The car was dead. We shut the engine down, it was dead. And here this big object come flying over, and I mean, if you put your hands up like this, that's about how big it looked to you. Bigger than a beach ball, As big or bigger. And we watched it fly over us, and then we turned, no sound whatsoever. We watched it go off south and west of us. Never a sound. If we'd have been looking down at the ground, we'd have never known it was there.
Fred and I pulled over on the side of the road on County Road 43 and stopped our patrol car, shut the engine off, and got out. And at that time, the object came directly over our patrol car, and we were looking up underneath it. And the object appeared to me that it was some 1,000, 1,500 feet higher, had 3 real bright lights underneath it that were shining not on the ground to illuminate the ground, but shining back up underneath the craft to illuminate the craft itself. And there was some lights around what I call the face of the craft or the crown of it, whatever you may call it. Appeared looking up through the glare of those other lights. Maybe green, blue, or red, or some of them might have been white. It was a large craft, and it had no sound whatsoever. It just continues didn't descend or pick up any speed or anything. Just a steady speed, just right over us, and went right on out of sight. Sometime after that, after 89 of February the 10th, we had several calls. The night of February the 10th, we had several calls, and they've been scattered reports ever since then. I had a person come in just last night. Marty Roberts in a rowboat carrier came in, and he described this object to me and drew me a diagram of it on a paper, and it was something similar to what I had seen on February the 10th of 89. And he's seen that this past date.
A lot of the people who are telling the stories are people that I know personally and have known for a lot of years. And I don't have any reason to doubt what they say they saw. But nobody is telling me what it is. They don't know either. They just know it's something that's very unusual.
Even more compelling evidence comes from this documented case where unidentified flying objects left physical traces of their presence.
I was driving home from work about 9:30 in the evening, 9:30, around that time. And approaching the road that turned off a paved road to my house, I noticed flashing lights in the distance and assumed that they were fireworks. And but was puzzled about why someone would be shooting fireworks in August. You see this at New Year's and the 4th of July, but never in August. But I continued on home, turning down a dirt road toward my house, and I got about halfway down the road, and suddenly, in the distance, about treetop level, this huge object just lit up. And it was a glowing orange-red color. It was enormous. And so I stopped the car, convinced that I was seeing things, or I didn't know what it was. However, when I stopped the car, it went out. And so I immediately proceeded to go home. Went on down the road, and I went a little distance, and it came back on. Just this, again, this huge thing. And I stopped again. And when I stopped, it went out. And I sat there for a few minutes, and then I started on again to come on down the road home, and it lit up again. And when I stopped the car, it didn't immediately go out, but it did go out. And I decided that I'm not staying, I'm leaving. And so I began reversing up this dirt road with the ditches on either side. No backup lights. I don't really know how yet I made it without going in the ditch, but when I finally reached the paved road and turned around and then looked back, coming toward me at about power line level was an enormous, bright light. The glowing object was not there any longer. It was just this really bright light, and moving very slowly in the direction that I was traveling. And so I immediately took off, and I went back to my office in Fort Payne. I have no idea what I saw, but it scared me to death. It was bigger than my house. It was just an enormous glowing object. There were 6 or 8 pine trees that were affected by whatever this thing was. They had turned a very strange color, the needles on the pine trees. There's a maple tree nearby that with leaves on one side and no leaves left at all on the other side of this tree. And underneath where this object was, there's nothing but bare ground. Everything had died, all the grass and weeds and foliage of any sort. Just totally bare ground. Well, this happened in 1976, and it seems, I'm not absolutely certain of this, but I think it's been about 4 years ago that it finally started to regrow, which would be 86. So there was a period there of somewhere around 10 years that we had just a big bare spot there, that nothing grew. And there was a large pine tree that looked like something had just snapped the top out of it. However, it had not turned a different color. It was still green, but it was broken.
Janine Lyle's story gains more credibility as a sergeant in the Alabama State Troopers recounts his investigation.
At the point where Janine stated she saw the object, there was a large area of dead vegetation, trees, grass, weeds, bushes, etc., all dead, nothing growing. I measured the area, and it measured 60 feet at the widest point by 90 feet at the longest point. There was a stand of grass in full bloom in the middle of the field road, and it came up to a point and stopped. And for a distance of 90 feet, there was nothing growing in this field road. And at the end of the 90-foot span, the grass again was in full bloom. There were no bushes alive, no trees alive in this entire area. There was a maple tree that had multiple trunks, and half the maple tree was in full bloom, and the side that would have been exposed to the object that Janine stated she saw was dead, and nothing was growing on that tree. I personally was puzzled then, and am still puzzled as to what might have caused that. As to what Janine saw, I have no idea. But something caused this area of 60 feet wide by 90 feet long to be completely void of any living vegetation for a several-year period of time. I made periodic trips back to the area over the next few years, and each time that I went, it was as before, nothing living in that particular area. Everything else around there was green and lush in the summertime and bare in the wintertime, as it should be. I believed Janine, and I'll state today I certainly believe that she saw exactly what she stated she saw. Now, what it was, we don't know.
Perhaps the most significant detail of the Fife sightings is the way the community responds to seeing UFOs. While amazed at the spectacular sightings in their area, the locals don't have a problem with being at the hub of UFO activity. Most UFO researchers consider the existence of UFOs a challenge to organized religion. The local pastors would disagree.
Well, of course, being a Christian, I think it all has to start from a basis. Being a Christian entails taking by faith something that you cannot actually see. The Bible, for instance. Now, there's a certain amount of things that you can read in there that can be proven, of course, by history and archaeology and so forth. But no way could a person come to the point of being a Christian just on the basis of what has been proven or has not been proven in the Bible. So the element of faith is there, and you've got to start there. So the reason I'm saying that is that for me as a Christian, I can see to where in the Bible Belt you have this underlying root system of faith in the Bible and in God, let's put it that way, so that you don't have to feel like you have to explain everything. Whereas if you're not in the area, the Bible Belt, or you haven't had that traditional those values of faith instilled in you, well, then you're going to feel like you have to prove. More things have to be proven to you factual rather than taking them by faith. That's why I think that you'll find in the Bible Belt less of an apprehension concerning UFOs.
I feel that Jesus, in the Scripture, and I believe it was in the Gospel of John, said that there were others that those that he talked to at that time did not know about, other sheep. And I feel that they could have been people from other planets, other places, not just necessarily limited to this world. But I think if you want a biblical text proof to say that there is a possibility within Christianity that Jesus allowed the possibility of other life, that would be it. That to some people might not be enough, but it is for me, because I just about base everything that I believe on the Word of God, and He gives me that leeway right there to think about the possibility of other life.
For me to say that to teach people here that I've figured God out, there are no such things as UFOs or whatever you want to call them, that's taken license a little too far. Because if I believe that the Bible says that God, the handiwork, declares the majesty of God, well, then there's no limit to what He can or cannot do. And if I understand my position as a believer, then I have to respect a certain amount of the unknown.
You've heard the term Southern hospitality. Sand Mountain is the epitome of Southern hospitality. People up here trust each other. A lot of the things that they do are done by handshake rather than by contract. And they trusted the outsiders, too, until the inside edition piece.
We sent Jeff Cole down there to see if E.T. has a Southern accent.
They came from outer space.
I still believe I saw a UFO.
Police were helpless.
There's nothing that I've ever seen before in my life.
And the town of Fife, Alabama, was stunned by the strange visitors.
My dog saw it, but he won't talk about it. He went and crawled on the floor, and I know that's what's happened because he talks to anybody.
911, I just had a UFO sighting.
Fife Police Chief Junior Garmany and Assistant Chief Fred Works got the call and went out to investigate what they figured was some, well, monkey business. Whatever it was they saw, it will be a long time before Fife forgets the things from out of this world.
There's some people that's going to ridicule us for it. Some people disbelieve it. But I hope them people themselves get to view it one of these days.
They may be coming to see you next.
There is a legitimate investigation going on down there, if you can believe it. The FAA and the Air Force are doing that investigation. And if any of you Martians are watching this broadcast, please drop by to see us and bring Elvis with you. Straight ahead, we'll get back to reality.
What was their reaction to the job they did?
Well, they did a job, all right. They spoofed the incident. They made it to appear like a Keystone Cops kind of a program, and people up here didn't like it at all. They thought they were here in good faith, so they showed them the Southern hospitality. And when the program came out, they were incensed, not just the people in the Fife, but the people of the whole area were very, very angry at what Inside Edition did. It was ridiculous. When Inside Edition came in to do their piece, everybody was welcome. We tried to make them feel at home and be a part of the community. But after the Inside Edition piece ran on TV, the outlook toward the media was completely different. It wasn't hostile, it's just that they didn't get any help. Help was slow in coming. You had to show good faith that what you were doing wasn't going to be like what Inside Edition did. People are still seeing things up here. They're not as frequent as they were during that time, but there are reports of seeing things in the sky almost constantly. I don't mean every day, but I mean hardly a week goes by when we don't get some reports of something in the air.
The history of UFOs in America goes back to 1897, when a great airship was seen traveling coast to coast by multiple witnesses. This despite the fact that airships did not yet exist. Reports of the great airship were printed in newspapers from New York to California. More recently, the modern age of UFOs in the United States was ushered in by the Army Air Force's Air Technical Intelligence Center. Among the first Air Force officers to analyze reports of UFOs was Wendell Stevens, a retired lieutenant colonel now living in Tucson, Arizona. Colonel Stevens left the Air Force after 26 years to investigate UFOs full-time around the world.
I was working in the Foreign Technology Division at Wright Field. I was a test pilot there. And all of the pilots had a desk. They had additional assignments besides their flying assignment. Mine was in the Foreign Technology Division in the Air Intelligence section, Air Technical Intelligence. It's where we analyzed technical data pertaining to engineering developments concerning aircraft discovered worldwide. It was forwarded through intelligence agencies to the United States government, and we got the aerotechnical information, and we tried to match it with other information from other sources, from other countries, trying to stay on top of the latest developments worldwide. And of course, at the same time, we were getting operational reports on strange aerial phenomena observed. During the war, this phenomena was called foo fighters. It comes from the French word for fire, fireball fighters. And all of those things were collectively called foo fighters, for lack of a better term. And we had reports from back as early as 1933 on such events observed and reported through intelligence channels. These foo fighters represented the ultimate development at the time. It was something beyond the visible capability of any country in the world to produce, as far as I could tell, from what was available to me, probably as much as anybody else in the country at the time. And my assignment took me to Anchorage, Alaska, where I went to an Army base. The Air Force had separated from the Army. Now I'm going back to an Army base. And I found that my initial position there was as Assistant Base Operations Officer, which was out of my specialty. But my primary duty was to supervise a team of technical technicians from the Air Materiel Command, from my parent command, who was up there working a highly classified radar project on an unclassified weather research project. The weather research project was using the B-29s to survey the Arctic, and that was an excuse for the B-29s to go into the Arctic space and run what they called profile missions with their mission folders on potential targets. They were assigned a grid plan to be flown after that to map both photo mapping, radiation mapping, thermal mapping, magnetic mapping. We ran all kinds of maps simultaneously with equipment installed aboard the B-29s when they were prepared for these missions. Along with that was this special team that I was supervising of civilians that installed a kit of equipment aboard the airplanes, which consisted of additional cameras. It consisted of all combat airplanes have 16-millimeter cameras mounted in the guns. But in addition to those cameras, we installed other free-mounted 16-millimeter cameras, handheld 16-millimeter cameras, 35-millimeter movie cameras, a 70-millimeter movie camera, and we had still cameras up to a Fairchild K20 that took a picture on an 8-inch by 10-inch negative. That's the size of a typewriter page. These cameras were all put aboard the craft, and each crew member was assigned specific responsibilities with each camera. In case something happened in the air, they were prepared. We also installed surge detectors on all of the electrical systems in the airplane. We had radio frequency detectors that swept the spectrum of radio frequencies. They would search the spectrum for an emission, stop on emission, read it for 30 seconds, and cancel it, and then sweep again looking for more until they had copied all of the frequencies being emitted. It would continually scan. Now, when those airplanes returned from a combat mission, all of this equipment was downloaded, and in the debriefing of the crew, if they had encountered anything, or if they had discovered surges on the line, or electrical anomalies, or interference on the radio, or anything unusual, we'd package all of the material into a metal box, and it would be couriered to Washington, chained to an officer's wrist that night. And about twice a month, they came back with reports of something operational in the field of activity we were surveying. They either saw other aircraft in flight over the Arctic under conditions that would indicate strange aircraft, high speeds, far beyond anything we could fly, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 miles an hour. Objects standing still in the air, motionless. Objects approaching the aircraft head-on, reversing direction, and then proceeding ahead of the aircraft at the same speed in flight. We had reports of disc-shaped objects that paralleled the craft in flight. In one case, we had one that paralleled the ship so close it was behind the trailing edge of the leading wing and ahead of the leading edge of the tail wing in the slot there. And they got pictures of it with all the cameras and with the Fairchild K10 camera too. And we had reports of objects that were seen to land on the ice, on the snow and the ice at the ice cap of the Arctic. We had reports of them landing on the water. We had a report of them submerging and disappearing. We had another report of one rising to the surface, being seen to come to the surface, leave the water, hover momentarily, and then take off at high speed and fly away. All of this was clearly beyond the capability of any of the aircraft that we had studied worldwide in the Air Technical Intelligence Center. And of course, they were very concerned about who might have experienced such a breakthrough without prior knowledge through intelligence sources. And they, to me, again, they represented the supreme development in aircraft, and that's what piqued my curiosity. I argued that they had to be extraterrestrial vehicles, but I was a major at the time, and my superiors were certain that they were a Russian breakthrough experienced as a result of the capture of German scientists at the end of the war, which was only 3 or 4 years afterwards. And they would have had to make some great progress if that was the case, but this was probably the main feeling at upper echelons was that the Russians had experienced a breakthrough that we didn't know enough about, and we were trying to find out what we could about it. I suppose the Russians, in their turn, thought we had experienced a breakthrough for the same reason. We even had reports of electrical disturbance to the degree that engines quit running in flight and then started up again by themselves. We had radio interference on the communications lines where they experienced complete communications blackouts, and then for no reason at all, communication would come back again. We had surges on all of the lines, including closed lines that were within the airplane. That, for instance, some systems in high technological airplanes work at, say, 300 cycles per second. Another part of the same equipment may work at 150 cycles per second. Some at 60 cycles. More and less. And we had electrical interference simultaneously on all frequencies. At times, we also had selective interference on different frequencies. We never knew what was causing this because it always cured itself in flight, which true failures don't do. And it indicated the potential for somebody else to selectively interfere with frequencies and functions aboard an operational vehicle in flight. And these are supposed to be our best military equipment. They're supposed to be foolproof, and somebody was fooling with the systems. And so I'm sure this got a lot of attention in Washington. I was never able to see anything because when a flight came back with evidence captured in that mission, my team of civilians downloaded the cassettes, the cartridges, the reels, the rolls, everything, and we were never allowed to process anything there. It was all packed in this metal box. It was like a small footlocker, and couriered to Washington, and nothing ever came back down the line to us. We don't know who handled it. We don't know how it was broken down, where it went, but the processing was all done elsewhere. So all I ever ended up with was the stories, but they were some very exciting stories.
In the late 1970s, documentary film producer Linda Moulton Howe heard a first-hand UFO account from her brother, then a military helicopter pilot. With details of the story fresh in her mind, Linda began investigating reports of unexplainable cattle surgery and cattle mutilations in the same areas of reported UFO activity.
One night, that fall of October of '75, I had a phone call while I was actually on the floor with a typewriter writing a medical script. And it was my brother, and he was extremely excited. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Linda, a UFO has set down on the base." And I rarely heard my brother speak with such energy. He was a helicopter pilot in '75 at Malmstrom Air Force Base outside of Great Falls. And that particular night, he had been at a wing party when beepers started going off all over. There was an emergency. And the emergency, as it turned out, was that electronic signal equipment had gone off over a missile silo known as Kilo 7 at Malmstrom. And a sabotage alert team was reporting that a football field sized, that'd be 300 feet in diameter, an orange glowing disc was hovering, or stationary, whatever word you want to use, very low to the top of the missile silo. And that it was casting light that was brighter than daylight. My brother said that the sabotage alert team actually had an argument with the command unit saying, "You want us to go closer than where we are," which was a quarter of a mile away, "then you come out here." And that kind of insubordination got people's attention too, that something serious was there at that missile silo. Jets were scrambled. When the jets got above whatever this orange glowing thing was, it blinked out. The sabotage alert team said, "We know it must still be there. It's just disappeared." As long as the jets were there, couldn't see it. The jets were called back. Back on it came. Began to rise and was picked up by radar until it Dopplered off at 200,000 feet. Well, the next day, my brother said that they sent a team out there to investigate that missile, and that they found that the targeting information in the computer head about where the warhead would go in the world had been changed. And the next day, they took out that whole missile and put in a new one. Same time, around the base, ranchers were finding mutilated animals. And my brother had a first-hand conversation with a flight surgeon at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1975 when a rancher brought in the back of a pickup truck a cow in which the lips alone had been beveled so perfectly and surgically, that the flight surgeon talked to my brother about it and said that the tissue of this particular cow had been drained so thoroughly of blood that it was not even red, it was the palest of pink white, and that he as a flight surgeon had no idea what had happened to that cow. Well, that was 75. The next year, I moved with my family from Boston to Denver. I had a little file on animal mutilations, but the truth was, I really in my own mind didn't have any solid connection of thought at all between the animal mutilations and what had happened at Malmstrom with that UFO. To me, in my mind, they were separate issues. I did a whole series of films and studio programs on environmental issues and was working on a program with a crew in the summer of '79. It was actually behind the scenes of a Colorado Shakespeare Festival, as far from this subject as you could get. And my sound man was talking about the fact that there were mutilations happening in the West. And sure enough, I began realizing that the newspapers had more mutilation stories, and I thought, well, I've got to get to the bottom of this. When this phenomenon, the mutilation, started back in the late 60s, I know that there were people who, in the beginning, they took it seriously, even though the rest of the world was saying it might be predator and satanic cult. I guess I find myself in that unusual and unique position of also being one of those people who took the mutilation seriously enough to stick with it long enough that I have found myself becoming an authority in an area that I never would have suspected, the mutilation of animals worldwide. But the carcasses themselves are one of the biggest single bodies of evidence that something highly unusual is taking place on this planet. Mutilations have continued every year in my files. I first started looking into the mystery in '79 to '80 when I did the documentary A Strange Harvest. And the phenomenon was worldwide then. It remained worldwide in stories throughout the beginning of the '80s. We're now in 1990. And right here in front of me, I have an article from Associated Press. Cattle mutilations, still unexplained. This is dated August 19th, 1990, Vicksburg Sunday Post, Vicksburg, Mississippi. Here is a story about 2 mutilations in a little teeny place in Mississippi called Guntown. This is 1990. This is right now. One of them, and I talked with the veterinarian, a veterinarian named McMillan in Guntown. Quote, a 500-pound heifer was found in early July with the left ear and 18 inches of skin from its left rib cage cleanly severed. Where the hide had been, a hole was bored through to the beast's heart. And the vet said that he could look right down through a hole in the rib cage and he could see a hole going through the heart.
Do we have any technology that could do that kind of a...
Maybe lasers. Maybe lasers. But the big question is, which contingency of the human community is going to be bothering with a calf in Guntown, Mississippi, with laser equipment that could do this? Current day lasers, if the military has it, fine. But this phenomenon started in 1967. Laser technology was lab bench research then, that year. And yet that first horse that was found in southern Colorado in September of 1967, referred to as Snippy, but the actual name was Lady, that horse had flesh stripped from the neck up. The bones were as clean white as if that horse had laid in the sun for months. A pathologist named John Altshuler, who's been working with me recently, was there confidentially. Didn't let anybody know. He looked at that horse and found that the internal sternum cavity of that horse in '67, all the major organs had been removed. And he said the thing that got him, since he had worked medically on cadavers of human bodies and other animals, including cows, in his work as a medical student, he said there was no blood, there was no presence of fluid, there was no indication there were just dried blood anywhere in the cavity or around that horse. He said how you would remove these kinds of organs and have it be so clean was remarkable to him in 1967. Further, he took some pieces of the mutilator's cuts and took them back to Denver. And under a microscope, he said he could see clear evidence of high heat at the edge of the wounds. This is 1967. 1989, he and I work on getting tissues from 9 mutilated animals in the summer of 1989 from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. And there was one in December in Idaho, so those were 4 separate states. Under a microscope, he finds the same evidence of high heat cut on the edges of these mutilator cuts. He estimated 350 degrees or above. Well, that clearly excludes predator. And in my own opinion, and with the conversations I've had with law enforcement about the whole issue of satanic cults, I have yet to meet a law enforcement person who privately would say that they thought satanic cults were responsible for this, because there have been too many undercover efforts trying to come up with some satanic cult or somebody who would even give information that a satanic cult was involved with mutilations from Canada throughout the United States, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Central America, South America, Australia, the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, parts of Europe. I mean, this is a worldwide operation. And in every single case, the animals basically are treated the same. The same things are missing. An ear is missing, an eye is missing. The jaw is either cut like this and comes down like this, and it comes across like this, and everything is removed. We're talking clean bone on an animal that is still warm to touch. The tongue is always cut in a vertical cut deep within the throat. The genitals of the males are usually removed in an oval that is about that big. The cows with udders, you'll see either something like a square or sort of an oval cut, and the entire udder is removed, or isolated teats are removed, or some variation on that theme, and the rectum is cored out. Now, that's the basic mutilation scenario, and there's no blood or fluid. Blood being drained. Now, that was part of the story in the 70s. There were evidence from both veterinarians and from people who had medical backgrounds who examined some of these animals, and they said that on the basis of the tissue, the muscle tissue, that it would appear that the blood had been so thoroughly drained that the muscle tissue was left a pale pink white. In the 80s, I have been where animals have been found, and I have been with people who have studied them, and I would say it's mixed. Some of the animals, the tissue is red, showing that there's the evidence of blood in the tissue, but that in terms of a cut that is as precise as these are, with no fluid anywhere, that in and of itself suggests that something unusual has happened where these excisions have been made. And further along these lines, how is fluid from bodies of all these animals, how is it being taken so thoroughly that there's no residue of any kind? In 1989, in Arkansas, 5 cows were found in a straight line on one farm. Every single one of them had been mutilated. One of those, and all were pregnant, and one of those, the stomach, had a very clean, very precise, extremely pale pink. It wasn't red, suggesting that blood had been removed from this wound. It was a hole cut in the belly of this pregnant cow, and through this hole, the weight of an unborn calf still in the embryo sac had come out onto the ground. So you're seeing a cow, and the unborn calf is partly in and partly out of the body. When the farmer saw this astonishing and horrifying scene, he called local authorities in the newspaper. Jim Williams, who's the editor of the Little River News in Ashdown, Arkansas, sent out his associate editor with a camera. She was the first one there, about 5 hours after the farmer had found them. And she said that the outside of the embryo sac, the cow, the soil, everything was dry. But what really got her was that she reached down to touch this embryo sac, and she was taking pictures, And inside this sac, she could see no fluid of any kind. What evaporated the embryo fluid, also where this calf was found? Those are the kinds of questions that have puzzled a lot of people. Now it's 25 years, we're talking a quarter of a century. This phenomenon is worldwide. It's been going on for decades. There's no one who has ever been arrested.
Cattle mutilations and unexplained cattle surgery continue to this day, unabated, around the world. Next up, UFOs and the Las Vegas connection. Meet George Knapp of KLAS-TV, Las Vegas. For 2 years, from 1989 through 1990, George produced several award-winning reports and full-length specials about the UFO phenomenon and those who get caught up in it. Initially optimistic that his programs would lend credibility to the topic of UFOs, his programs were seen by millions here in America and overseas. His programs, UFOs: The Best Evidence, Parts 1 and 2, became a hot property on the illegal video cassette market, with more people having seen the illegally copied tapes than originally saw the programs as broadcast. After dealing with the subject of UFOs and high-visibility proponents of the Flying Saucer Society, his initial optimism has turned into pessimism after having his fill of lunatic fringe ufologists.
We've all seen so many people in this field where they want to convince you you've got to believe. I'm more of the opinion you put out the information and let people make up their minds. I wrote to President Carter to ask him a couple of questions, and that's a whole other line. I never got through to him either. I wrote to virtually every NASA astronaut who has ever been associated with this phenomenon and never got a single response from any of them. You'd figure you'd at least get a form letter back, and never got anything. I wrote, I'm very disappointed with the Freedom of Information Act, how effective that is, too, because I didn't get diddly out of that. Wrote to NASA knowing that they had a certain body of information. I asked for all of it. Well, here it is. Here's all of it. And 6 months later, somebody else asks for all of it, and they got a lot bigger pile of all of it than I got. So I think, there's very few checks and balances on that. They give you what they want in that system. I asked for my own FBI file. I know that there is one there. I've covered the president on a number of occasions. I know there have been some background checks. I know I've been mentioned to the FBI in the course of investigating various stories here in Las Vegas in association with organized crime. They have no file on me. That was their response.
Oh, yes, they do.
Well, they do now. Some of the information is very disturbing. It changes the way you view things. It changes the way you look at everything once it hits you what really is going on. And I think the government could be right in a sense that if the story came out in its entirety, if the president went on television and said, they're here, we can't do anything about it, that it would shake our foundations. It would shake our belief in religion and shake our belief in government. Maybe people would stop paying their taxes because it would change the way we view everything. It's changed my life. I mean, I'm not seeing God or anything, but it's changed the way I view things.
Most controversial in Knapp's UFO report was the story of this young scientist, Robert Lazar. Lazar claims that out in the Las Vegas desert, he worked on operational flying saucers at an area called Site 4. He says it's our country's #1 top secret.
I had a casual meeting with Dr. Edward Teller while working at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. He referred me, after several years, to a job out in the New Mexico desert, a place known as S4 near Area 51. Where many top-secret government projects had their home base, essentially. Edward Teller is the director of the program, and I think someone approved by Ed Teller, someone suggested by him, I think that carries enough weight in itself. I had a fascination with small jet engines. I had built and installed a jet engine in a little Honda Civic, a small car. It made the front page in the local Los Alamos paper, The Monitor. Coincidentally, and in fact on the back of that front page, Ed Teller was giving a lecture on SDI, and I believe that was June 1982 at Los Alamos. As I was walking up to the lecture hall, I wanted to hear what Ed Teller had to say. As I was walking up to the lecture hall, I got there relatively early, thinking there would be a fairly large turnout, and as it turned out, there wasn't. I got there about an hour and a half early, and Ed Teller is sitting outside, and he had just bought a paper out of the paper machine, and he was reading the front page, and I thought, well, what an opportunity to introduce myself. I can say, well, I'm the guy you're reading about. I always wanted to meet you, so on and so forth, just to get into some small talk. We talked for a little bit. He seemed interested in some things I had to say, and really just wanted to hear his viewpoints on certain things. And we had a cup of coffee together and a donut down at the cafeteria. That was the extent of our meeting. After that, I heard his lecture, and later, after I had moved to Las Vegas, when I decided to get back into the scientific field and sent out resumes to many other laboratories around the country, also any government research organizations, I did shoot a resume to Ed Teller, too. He called right after receiving it and said, I had directed your resume to someone in Nevada. It's a highly classified project, and they'll be requesting an interview. Within 20 minutes, the phone rang. That was the request for the interview. So obviously, Ed Teller gave it more than a nudge. It was more like a directive that this person will be interviewed for this particular job, and that's the bottom line. So yeah, he did get me into the program. In early 1989, I was already in the program and working at a slow pace, because at the same time I had to go through an extensive security investigation that was like no other I had been through before. I had Q clearance from Los Alamos, and this was something far above it, which I was told was 38 levels above Q clearance. It required an executive order to be signed at that time. At that time, that executive order was signed by Ronald Reagan. I was only in the program for a short time, however. I think that lasted all the way till April 1989, when we finally parted ways, and there's a whole story behind that. Initially, during the interviews, it was never specifically stated, hey, Bob, we're going to be working on flying saucers or alien craft recovered from crashes or recovered from wherever. The job title was a senior staff physicist. I was to be working on advanced propulsion techniques. Certainly when I made a few trips out there, began reading briefings, things dealing with the origin of the craft, the race or the type of aliens that piloted the craft, specifics on what these looked like, what their physical structure was from autopsy reports, things of this sort. Seeing the hardware, I realized that this is not a research effort, that this is back engineering, and that we have the device, the craft itself, and we are working backwards to find out how it works. They have the finished product and really want to find out the manufacturing technique, the basic physics in it, and it became very obvious what we're working on. But it was strange that even up till the very end, really no words were said about what was going on. The time I saw the craft, large disc flying saucer, typical flying saucer, even that I basically put out of my mind, thinking, well, this obviously is a creation of the government, some sort of advanced type of flying vehicle, maybe an advanced fighter of the future, and this explains all those crazy flying saucer stories. People just seeing tests of this craft. The real striking part was when I saw the interior of the craft and noticing that the seats and everything were extremely small, obviously made for a small creature or children. Obviously they wouldn't let children in there, but that was before I got heavy into it to see that we're talking about strange languages and things and technology that doesn't even exist, and so on and so forth. The information concerning the craft itself, just the hardware, is very compartmentalized. There's a group that deals with specifics on the navigational equipment, the specifics on the metallurgy of the craft, and the specifics on the propulsion and power system of the craft, which is what my group worked on. That in itself created a focal point for our research and looking into what we were dealing with. So I, in a short amount of time, because that was all we had to look at, really gained quite a bit of information on how things operated. Of course, verifying the employment there is somewhat difficult. Los Alamos denies I've ever worked there, as does Kirkmeyer, even the subcontractor for Los Alamos, which is interesting. We went back and were able to dig up an inter-lab directory phone book with my name in it. Certainly I got some of my colleagues from Los Alamos to verify that I worked there, but for the most part, Los Alamos has kept everything pretty quiet and even denies that I ever lived in the town, though I'm known by many people in the town and many of the people I worked with, supervisors, so on and so forth.
When Lazar went to trial on unrelated charges in 1990, even the judge agreed that Lazar seemed to be a man without a country.
We do have a W-2 form of record that shows that he worked for the United States Department of Naval Intelligence. And I also note that he is in fact listed in the Los Alamos National Laboratory telephone directory. It's obvious that it's very difficult to get information on Mr. Lazar from government sources, enormously difficult.
A lot more than just UFO sightings have been reported out here in the Nevada desert. Independent investigator and reporter Tony Pelham has spent countless evenings outside the Nevada test site, where he's run across mutilated cows, strange lights in the sky, and unfriendly security guards without ID.
The desert up there is full of troops in camouflage uniforms. They carry M16s, and they have no identification. They're not Air Force, they're not Army. They don't have any markings at all. And I came real close to being taken to jail a couple of times. So I found that real strange. I heard all types of theories about who they were. But they would challenge me, and then I would challenge them. When they would approach me, they would say, "What are you doing here?" I would say, "What are you doing here? You're on BLM land. You're roaming around outside the secure area." My opinion is that the government is hiding something that's a lot more secure than anything similar to the stealth or the U-2 or that type of thing. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there's an underground alien base up there. I don't know if they are UFOs or aliens. I just know that they have got security up there that's far beyond what you see around any military type installation. And I don't understand why the uniformed security guards with M16s don't have markings. And when I ask them, "Are you with the Air Force? Are you with the Army?" they don't answer any questions. They just direct you to leave the area. The troopers have held me and had the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department come out on 3 different occasions, and each time they filled papers out on me and instructed me not to go near that area. And on the last occasion...
On what pretense?
That I have no business near a secret facility. And I explained to them, I'm not even within a mile. I'm on BLM land. So several months ago, about 6 months ago, I went up and I just went near the Medlin Ranch, and I spotted one of the blazers, but I went nowhere near the fences. I've never crossed the line. I've only gone near it sometimes. On my way back to Alamo, the sheriff's department met me, pulled me over, filled out another set of papers, and in a very formal manner said, "Mr. Pelham, this is the last time you're being told. The next time," he said, "and I'm telling you from the higher-ups, if you come back up and go up this road near this facility again, you are going to jail, period." On one particular occasion, I had some bizarre experiences of lights seeming to be at a great distance and then just in a matter of seconds being right at me. But I have never gone on camera or ever come back to George Knapp or anybody and claimed to have seen a UFO. I don't know what I saw that night. Shortly after that, as I started back, a blazer came in front of me up from a side road, and the camouflage uniform troopers stepped out with their M16s, and they asked me what was I doing coming from a secure military installation. And I said, "I'm not coming from this." I said, "I'm sitting out here in the desert." And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm watching the strange lights." And he said, "Strange lights? What lights? We didn't see any lights." I went north of Las Vegas, just above Alamo, in the area known as Area 51, north of there, and I crisscrossed a lot of ranches all through Lincoln County and up in Whitebine County, and I found a number of dead cattle Some of them I believe to be mutilated of the same fashion that was shown in Linda Howe's book, The Strange Harvest. I'm satisfied that I personally saw some mutilated carcasses, certainly that look identical to some of the ones that Linda Howe showed in The Strange Harvest from back during the 70s.
And you obviously talked to these ranchers also.
Right, and in one particular case when my son and I found a black and white bull that had all the classic signs of the stripped away lower jaw, one ear, and the rectum cord out, and the carcass had not been touched by any coyotes or anything. There were no tracks around it. When I went and approached the ranchers about it, they just rode away, the group that were there, and I asked a couple of other neighboring ranchers, and they says, oh yeah, somebody drove by and shot that bull, and it laid out there. Which I don't buy that at all. It was a mutilated cow. When I actually looked over the sheriff's records and would talk with people who had held prominent positions in those counties off the record, they told me that from their own experience of investigating these fresh kills, that they personally believed that it was done by something from outside this planet. They say absolutely they don't believe it was coyotes or any type of animal, and there was no tracks. There was just no way anybody could have gotten into the area and done this type of mutilation without being seen by somebody or caught, or at least they would have left some tracks. And the fact that there's been thousands of these mutilations around the country and not one has ever been solved. Not one. There's not one sheriff's department or police department that has one solved. And so, like I say, these people that hold positions in the community, they don't want to go on a TV camera and say, yeah, I think it was done by some type of aliens. But off the camera, they say that they believe, because at the same time, the strange lights and the number of supposedly alleged UFO sightings in the area, that there's some connection between the mutilation of the cows and the strange lights in the sky. And all I was trying to do was either prove or disprove that was going on. And to my satisfaction, I believe that the cows are being mutilated by something that nobody that I know of has explained satisfactorily how it's being done.
In July of 1947, the world's first story of a crashed flying saucer came out of Roswell, New Mexico. The story was written and released to the press by Base Public Information Officer Lieutenant Walter Hott, under orders from his boss, Roswell Army Airfield Commander, Colonel William Blanchard.
I got a phone call from Colonel Blanchard, and he pretty much dictated, not all the verbiage, but it hit the salient points, telling me about the flying disc that we assumedly had pieces of, and who had gone and gotten it, and what was being done with it. And I wrote the release from the information that he gave me over the telephone. A rancher had brought some material in, or had told the sheriff about some material that he had on his ranch that he had found, and the intelligence officer of the base had been sent out to the ranch to pick up this material and bring it back into the base. And that Major Marcel, who was the intelligence officer, was going to fly it onto 8th Air Force headquarters to give it to General Ramey, who was our immediate commander.
The remains found were taken by Major Marcel to his home in Roswell, just down the street from Walter Hott. Major Marcel showed the retrieved material to his wife and son before returning to the crash site. This time, truckloads of the wreckage were brought to this hangar, and quickly the building was secured.
Well, I went to my normal duty station, which was my building where we normally worked on the flight line, and later on that day I went to the building where we had these flyway kits stored, and we had been going in there almost on a daily routine basis, and that particular day there was an armed guard at the building and we could not get in. What was in that building or why we couldn't get in, it was never explained to us, but we couldn't get in the building that we had normally been going into on a daily or 2 or 3 times a week basis. We all had top secret clearance because we were atomic outfit, and we had all the necessary credentials to do everything that we did on the base, but we couldn't go in that building anymore that day.
In recent years, many new witnesses have come forward with more details of the UFO crash of 1947. Among them are several neighbors of rancher Mac Brazel, who remember Mac coming by their homes to show them pieces of the strange material he found in the Corona Desert.
In 1947, I think it was about the 1st of July, and he came over with some something that looked like wood that he had found on the ranch and wanted us to go look at it, and we didn't have the time or means to go do it, and we talked him into taking it to Roswell and showing them down there, and they brought him back to find where it was at, and then took him back down there and kept him several days in Roswell while they cleaned up everything. And when he came back, he said they told him it was a weather balloon. If he ever found another, and he wouldn't report it. The piece he brought up was about the size of a lead pencil and about 4 inches long, 4 or 5 inches long, and it was kind of a tan color, kind of like what we'd say plastic now, but we didn't have plastic then, and you couldn't cut it or burn it or whittle it, you know, just very, very hard. It was very light, it seemed to be, and he said that the stuff that looked kind of like aluminum foil, he said you'd crumble it up and then it'd straighten out. It wouldn't stay creased. It'd just open out, you know, but he couldn't get any of it off to bring up. He said he couldn't cut it or anything. We told him it was probably a UFO or a flying saucer, and we'd heard there's a reward out for it, and go down and collect it. And so, you know, we thought maybe he would. I guess I told him not to say anything. I don't know. But he didn't. He just said if he ever found anything else, they wouldn't find out about it. So I guess he was a little upset about him keeping him.
Neighbor Mary Ann Strickland also remembers a visit by her friend, the rancher Mac Brazel.
He came by after this incident, and he had been humiliated and detained for several days, and he was a reliable, solid person, dependable, and he was, I think, anxious to square himself with his neighbors when he came by. I mean, to assure them that what he did was on the up and up. He came to the corral. Mac was living alone at this ranch where he was the manager. His wife lived in Alamogordo. And Mac would come and visit with the men in the family. He came into the house once in a while, not too often. And the time that he brought the sample of what he had picked up, he was at the corral. My daughter and 2 sons and husband were at the corral, and they saw it. My daughter says that it could be crumpled up and straightened right back out. He was telling my family about how badly the Army people had treated him down here. And it amounted to humiliation and detention when there wasn't any good reason. He had come in good faith. And they didn't accept it that way, or didn't appear to. He said they threw him in jail. He said if he ever found anything like that again, he would never show it to them. He would never bring it in. He had done so as what he thought was a good citizen, and he had been humiliated and mistreated, and he was very disturbed.
Phyllis McGuire is the daughter of Sheriff George Wilcox. She too remembers the day when rancher Mac Brazel came by her father's police station with the material from a debris field on the ranch he managed.
He told me that Brazel had been in to report a flying saucer, and I asked him if he believed that, and he said yes, because I don't know why he would come into my office and tell me this story for no reason at all. He had some material with him, he said, which I did not know what it was. And he said that he had sent some deputies out there, and they had seen some things. They had seen a corral that had some of the material in it, and they had seen a large burnt spot on some grass about the size of a football field. My mother told me years later that the Air Force asked them not to say anything at all about what had happened, and they changed the story that the paper had put out originally to say that what had been found was a weather balloon. She said that there were bodies and an unidentified flying object on the ground. There were bodies too, but that they stopped the investigation that the sheriff's office was going to do because the Air Force wanted them to.
Yet another story of the strange debris comes from Charlie Schmid. In 1947, he handled pieces of the strange debris on location in the Corona Desert.
There was some material looked just like tinfoil, but quite strong. And you could ride it up in your hand, and it'd just straighten out, no kinks, no nothing. It just straightens out by itself. Then there were some pieces of material that looked like aluminum, real light stuff, but strong. It was about 16 inches long, about 2.5 inches, and maybe a 1/4 inch thick. But you couldn't bend it or twist it or do anything with it. Even by putting it up against a rock and jumping up and down, you could not bend this material. And then there was some material that looked like wood, which I don't know whether it was or not. It was broke, but it wasn't broke square. It broke like a spear off at an angle, and it was about 1 inch thick. I mean square, we'd say, that way. But it had some writing, looked like flower on just one side. It had pink petals, center like a flower, and green mixed in, but you couldn't make no leaves out of it or nothing like that. But it was green in between these flowers on that one side of this piece of wood.
A final story confirming the presence of alien bodies comes from former Roswell mortician Glenn Dennis. Dennis refused to talk on camera, but gave us these drawings of alien bodies. The pictures are reproductions of drawings given to him by a nurse who helped prepare the strange bodies for a flight out of Roswell Army Airfield. More details of what actually happened at Roswell in 1947 have just been revealed in this new book, UFO Crash at Roswell. To date, it is the most comprehensive report on the historic events of 1947. The authors are former Air Force intelligence officer Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, Director of Special Investigations for the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies.
First of all, this started out as a reinvestigation of Roswell. We saw that time was running out, that witnesses were being lost as far as forever, as far as their testimony, as far as their involvement. And we had to go back and re-interview the old witnesses, corroborate their testimony, and then seek out new testimony to confirm what we already knew about Roswell.
What kind of things are you finding?
We're finding new military witnesses, people who have small bits of the information, people who have been involved in maybe a flight out with some unusual material, people who might have seen something unusual, little bits and pieces of information that when we fit it into the whole puzzle begins to give us a clear picture of exactly what happened in Roswell in 1947. All our evidence, unfortunately, is testimony from people. We don't have a piece of the wreckage. But when we put all that evidence together, that makes a very strong case. I think some of the best testimony has come from Bill Brazel, the son of the man that found it. He was involved in some aspects of it. He was involved in finding some additional pieces after the military cleaned up the debris field. Later on, he was approached by the military, and those pieces were basically taken away from him by the military. He likes to say, well, they weren't confiscated, but the officer in charge made it clear that if he didn't surrender them, that they had the authority, or at least said they had the authority, to take those pieces away from him. So we have that sort of thing, but we have that kind of testimony from literally 250 people. So when we put it all together, can all these people be lying? Would all these people be involved in some kind of a hoax or some kind of a joke? And what would be the motivation for it? Nobody's getting paid for any of this sort of thing. And why would the wife of one of the men that was involved in flying the bodies out of Roswell, suddenly when we get to the point where we've identified that her husband was a member of the 509th Bomb Group and he was involved in this, suddenly tell us that she couldn't talk about it, she didn't want to talk about it, and hang up the phone on us if there was nothing to it? And what did her husband tell her before he passed away? So we've got that sort of thing going for us, and I think that's the body of the testimony, the body of the evidence that we have.
The wealth of testimony, the video depositions, the sworn affidavits, the deathbed statements that we have, the 24 FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, concerning specific details about this experience, all paint a picture that I defy anyone to come up with a conventional explanation with proof.
Among the first investigating the Roswell crash and retrieval was nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman. Currently combining talents with aviation writer Don Berliner, they too are releasing a new book with other details on the events of 1947.
The case that at least one, more likely two, flying saucers were recovered in the central New Mexico, if you will, complete with alien bodies, is far better than the case against most convicted criminals. You go to a court of law with this, you'd have no trouble convincing a jury that indeed, now you don't have every little detail, as you never do, even in a criminal case, but we certainly have enough to establish that a saucer crashed, at least one, probably two, that the United States government, agencies of the United States government, recovered the wreckage and the remains of alien bodies, that they proceeded on with that, just as you'd expect them to try to figure out more of the information, and covered it up very effectively, and probably quite appropriately at the time. That's easy to establish. The real bottom line is that this is probably the most significant event of this century, maybe this millennium. I mean, something that proves to us that we're not alone in the universe, and maybe our views about ourselves are a little bit strange, not in accordance with reality, is going to have an impact on religion, on politics, on technology, on our own psychology. This is a truly earth-shaking event.
The Roswell crash and retrieval are now virtually proven. Between Randall and Schmidt and Friedman and Berliner, hundreds of testimonial affidavits, deathbed statements, and videotaped depositions have now been collected. You can read them all in their respective books. The people coming forward with this information are among the most level-headed and patriotic of American citizens. It only remains for our government to tell us the truth, all of the truth, about the Roswell crash and retrieval of 1947. When we come back, we'll look at one of the most controversial aspects of the UFO phenomenon, witness claims of alien abduction. One of the most controversial aspects of the UFO phenomenon and its effect on our society are claims of interaction with UFO occupants and tales of being abducted by aliens. Perhaps the most convincing testimony comes from Travis Walton of Snowflake, Arizona.
This was on November 5th, 1975. I was working with a crew of men in the woods, and we left the area. We'd worked late that night. It was getting dark, and as we were leaving down this dirt road way back in the woods, we saw a large glowing object near the road. Well, we stopped the truck, and I got out, went up to it for a closer look. I thought that this thing was just going to shoot right off, and then, I hurried towards it thinking, it'll be gone before I even get close enough to see it that well. But it didn't leave. It started to move, and the sound got louder. So I jumped down behind the end of a log there, and I decided I better get out of there. And I raised up, turned to go, and at that instant I just felt a numbing shock. I blacked out. Men in the truck said they saw a beam of energy come out of the craft and hit me in the upper body, knocked me through the air. When I regained consciousness, I was on board the craft, apparently. I came to kind of slowly. I was kind of groggy. I didn't regain consciousness real quickly, but when I finally got where I could see, I saw these creatures standing over me. And I became hysterical instantly. I knocked them back and jumped away from them. They started towards me. I screamed and made threatening gestures, and they stopped and turned and left this room. They had gone to the right, so I ran down to the left. It was down a curving hallway. I ran by some other doors, and I came to another door, and I kind of got to control myself a little bit. I kind of panicked there for a minute, but I stopped, went in this room. It was a very strange room. You could see the stars projected on the walls, or maybe you could see them through maybe some kind of a viewing screen or something. I don't know. But there was a chair in the middle of this room that had some controls on it, and I went up to that and tried to see if I could figure a way to open a door or get out of there or something. Another being came in at that point. The first creatures that I saw were very, very different from us. They were short, less than 5 feet in height. They had large, bulging craniums, kind of a chalky white look to their appearance, very large eyes. He took me out of that room that this was parked in, down a hallway to a smaller room where there were some other people like him, and they put me down on a table, and I struggled with him, and I was knocked out, made unconscious with a kind of an oxygen mask-like device. And the next thing I know, I wake up on the road.
Well, I know the Travis Walton case is a particularly striking case, and mainly because of the 6 witnesses. 5 passed in flying colors. An examination by a polygraph operator who was under the impression and the suspicion that they had murdered the then missing Travis Walton. And that investigator, who was a police polygraph operator, told me that if there was any defrauding or any kind of a conspiracy to produce a hoax, these 5 did not know of it, and that they were telling the truth when they told the story about Travis Walton. He remembered very little of the 5 days. But it wasn't what he remembered, but it was the fact that there were so many witnesses that had been examined in that particular way. I think that puts it down as one of the principal and most persuasive of the abduction cases.
Seeing UFOs or believing in them is a personal experience. The interpretation of paranormal experiences is individually subjective to the percipient. Their interpretation of the experience, positive or negative, becomes their belief. Their belief becomes their reality.
Bye.